It is undoubtedly a difficult task to be asked to respond to such a book. Most of us here are familiar with the work of Professor Pumla Gobodo-Madikizela, and therefore to be asked to respond to her and the other editors of the book, Friederike, Bubenzer, and Marietjie, Oelofsen, one is asked, I offer to reveal just how naive they are. After all, it has been the work of Professor Gobodo-Madikizela to attempt to understand the impact that South Africa's history has had and is continuing to have in the present, and to therefore assume that you can tell her something new, I think is a wishful dream, but I'll try. Almost all of her intellectual work, at least one that I'm familiar with, has attempted to respond to the challenge of building a society after a historical trauma, and in a context that society has been South Africa. The question that has therefore consistently preoccupied her is, can societies that have been traumatized heal, or are they bound through the internal structure of trauma to reenact the very same trauma that found the society? These are questions, as I indicate, that have preoccupied much of her intellectual life, and they are questions evidenced by this book that continue to be of great interest to her. And why this might be the case, I think it's obvious enough. As the celebrated South African writer Cindy Makona has told us before, trauma is in the blood of the people of South Africa. We can neither escape it nor ignore it. These are the things that sit with us. This is first and foremost an intriguing title. Living in South Africa in the early 21st century, it is almost easy to say or think that one knows the things that sit with us. After all, over the past few years, our public discourse has fundamentally changed from what it was in the 90s or the 2000s. If then the most important deliberations taking place in South Africa's public discourse were about truth and reconciliation, the building of a state, preoccupation with the kind of policy direction that South Africa should take, then today in 2019, there is no doubt that much of this language could be seen to be that of the past. Or is it? Discussions about race, gender, sexuality, and increasingly class have become the norm in South Africa's public discourse, but often taking on a remarkably divisive and crude form. And much of this, as many of us know, has been enabled by the new social media platforms that are increasingly, or have in fact, dominated our lives, even as there is no system of accounting for their effects on individuals and consequently on very diverse societies. As yet, it remains unclear whether or not these conversations will ultimately lead to a better society, or if in fact they are taking South Africa into a path of no return, where racial polarization, as our contemporary global politics suggest, is a wishful, where racial polarization, as our contemporary global politics suggest, is a thing, wish as we might, that we ultimately can never escape. It is therefore unknown where such debates, if we can call them that at all, will lead to, and I am yet skeptical of pontificating on whether or not they suggest a positive or negative move. What we do, however, know, as the editors of this book are insistent on telling us, is that not speaking about the past can be dangerous, as it might potentially create a society in which people assume that all is well, when that is in fact not the case. And as we know, if things remain hidden and not spoken about, then those things always have the potential to pose a threat to whatever stability a nation may want or desire to have. I start with these reflections to suggest that there's something remarkably different about the book that we have in front of us. Although, as I've suggested, discussions on race seem to be too present with us in South Africa, often, however, such discussions are legitimately raised by young South Africans who feel dissatisfied with the state of the country. To many of them, the problems that bedevil South Africa have to do with the fact that we have not successfully dealt with the consequences of our history. The economic divides continue to be racialized, and increasingly they seem to be benefiting a small minority of the black population that has come to mimic the very same behaviors of the oppressor. Arrogant, elitist, conspicuous consumption, and a general indifference to the fact that the majority of South Africans continue to suffer and not know where their next meal will come from. What makes this book different then is that it reminds us of the fact that while we might be making the right noise as young people, that there's another generation of South Africans that are still dealing with the direct effects of apartheid. These are people who lived during apartheid and therefore whose experience of time is markedly different from that of ours. To many of them, the past continues to live in the present, and judging by the nature of these narratives, it is a past that will without a doubt continue to have life in the future. It is a past, in other words, that cannot be forgotten nor fully assimilated into the self, as it is the nature of trauma to consistently reconfigure itself with time. Now to get into the stories. These are the things that sit with us begins with the story of Thembeka Xoleni, who was born in Brighton Street in Langa. She recalls the tragic stories of black men who were moving from the rural Eastern Cape to Cape Town for work, and how, in that process, they had to endure the humiliation of being dipped in a similar way that is done to cows. This was done to ensure that the men did not bring any diseases with them to the city. But the ultimate consequences of this practice, as Thembeka remembers, is that it brought a great sense of humiliation to the men. She recalls that, I quote, "They were dipped, that is what was done to them. The men walked down in rows like cows waiting to be dipped. The women would be standing, watching, singing," unquote. What is also important in Thembeka's recollections of experiences of apartheid is how the psychological belief in the superiority of the white race was deeply entrenched into the minds of many people. She remembers that, I quote, "You'd be walking in town and you'd see a white person approaching with children. Without them prompting you, you would go and walk off the pavement, even if it meant being crashed into by a car," unquote. Thembeka's story, similar to other stories contained in the book, is about how the memories of apartheid continue to live and to cause pain even after the official system of apartheid has been abolished. A lot of the stories in the book are about the dislocation that apartheid caused to make people's sense of home. Abeda Stoffberg, who was born in District 6, remembers that, I quote, "In 1957, my mother and father received a letter that said we had to move out. Either we move our own stuff or they will remove it for us with the big council trucks." And this consequently meant that her family had to move to Bonteheuwel when she was 11 years old. She recalled the traumatic incident when her father took them out to the beach, and it so happened when they were disembarking from the train that her beach ball fell out of her hands and went into a whites-only area. She remembers that as this happened, I quote, "The police were watching us. My daddy could see that one of them was getting his baton ready. I wanted to run and fetch the ball, but my daddy stopped me. He knew they would hit me. You know how they beat up my daddy. He beat up my father so badly. We cried. My father was taken to Caledon Square police station at the parade. He was full of blood." A better story communicates the moral depravity that characterized apartheid. This is again shown in Peter Fernanda's story, whose family suffered and continues to suffer the consequences of land dispossession. His father owned a farm in the Darlings district, and he recalls how their white neighbors came to tell him that his, quote, "cows were eating the feed of his land. My father then needed to go to Cape Town to work for food for the animals on the farm. When we went back to the farm, everything was gone. We lost everything in that farm, and this would eventually lead to them moving to Bonteheuwel, where I quote, "we weren't allowed chickens and cows. We had to get rid of them. It was a double knock for my father." Even in the post-apartheid, these are the memories that continue to haunt and sit in Peter's life. Maria Julius' story, on the other hand, shows the intersection between apartheid, war, and violence. Maria's family moved to Bonteheuwel when she was 11 years old, and she shares the pain they experienced when they had to use coal stoves and had to, quote, gather wood because we didn't have money to buy wood and such things, because the old man didn't earn that much. The old man is Maria's father, who was a soldier and came back home traumatized after his participation in the Second World War. Maria remembers that, I quote, "My father was a strange man because he came back from the war and wasn't a very normal father. His one leg was amputated, and he always told us stories about his prisoner of war days. Sometimes he would stop because it was too traumatizing for him. And the consequences of that was that the home that they lived in became very unhomely, as they couldn't be themselves around their father. This is why Maria says that when she met her husband at the age of 22, I quote, "I reckoned I had to get out of the house." One of the most prominent historical events in the history of apartheid was the 1976 student uprisings. Although these protests started in Soweto, they quickly traveled to other parts of South Africa as more young people, particularly in high schools, started demonstrating against the system of apartheid and the imposition of Afrikaans as a language of instruction. Joseph Hassim, who was born and lived in Boga before his family was moved to Bonteheuwel, was deeply affected by these riots as a teenager. He says that, I quote, "I don't tell this story often, but this is a story that has been with me ever since it happened. The story that Joseph comes to reveal is the story of Christopher Tretter, who was shot in front of him. Christopher Treter is an important figure in South African history, as he is remembered as the first student to be killed by the apartheid police during the student protest in Bonteheuwel. Yourself, who had been one of the first to participate in throwing stones against a police car, remains haunted by this event, as it sometimes, I quote, comes back and replays in my head. Then maybe I'll become someone quiet. It replays because it could have been me. The stories in the book then suggest that the past continues to be too much with us. And here, when I thought too much with us, I was actually playing with William Wordsworth's poem, The World is Too Much with Us. And it so happened that the news of the passing of Toni Morrison this past week happened when I had in fact taken a break from reading her last collection of nonfiction, Mouthful of Blood, Essays, Speeches, Meditations. And I actually reflected on her this past Sunday in the City Press, Morrison and Mandela. I tried to be controversial, but it really did not work. I would like then, in closing, to offer what I think are some of the most important reflections on race, which I hope can add something to the discussions that the book we are here to talk about have started. The last essay that I read in the collection and that I've been reflecting on is entitled Race Matters. In it, Morrison writes, I quote, "I have never lived, nor has any of you, in a world in which race did not matter. Such a world, one free of racial hierarchy, is usually imagined or described as dreamscape, Edenesque, utopian, so remote are the possibilities of its achievement. As an already and always race writer, I knew from the very beginning that I would not reproduce the master's voice and his assumptions of the all-knowing father, of the all-knowing law of the white father, nor would I substitute his voice with that of his phony mistress or his worthy opponent. For both of these positions, mistress or opponent, seemed to confine me to this terrain, in his arena, accepting the house rules in the dominance game. If I had to live in a racial house, it was important, at the least, to rebuild it so that it was not a windowless prison into which I was forced. Yet in that freedom, as in all freedoms, especially stolen ones, lies danger. Could I redecorate, redesign, even reconceive the racial house without forfeiting a home of my own? Would life in this renovated house mean eternal homelessness? Would it condemn me to intense bouts of nostalgia for the race-free home I've never had and would never know? And indeed, she passed away without knowing it. These questions, Morrison continues, these questions which have engaged so many have troubled all my work. How to be both free and situated, how to convert a racist house into a race-specific yet non-racist home, how to enunciate race while depriving it of its lethal cling. There are questions of concept, of language, of trajectory, of habitation, of occupation, and although my engagement with them has been fierce, fitful, and constantly, I think, evolving, they remain in my thoughts as aesthetically and politically unresolved. I would therefore like to congratulate the editors of this book. These are the things that sit with us. It reminds us of the complexity of our histories and the challenges that still bedevil us. I'm open to the invitation that it has made to all of us to start thinking seriously about our history and our future, but to also remember as young people that as important as we are, this country belongs to, as sounds like a political statement. Everyone has been affected by apartheid, and we should be cognizant of that. I think that's what the book reminded me of. Thank you.